What is the most famous weakness of all? Okay, retcons, maybe. Terrible movie adaptations, not bad. Yep, definitely Kryptonite. Superman. He's practically the most powerful superhero in the DC universe. But his greatest weakness is Kryptonite, a green rock. How does this work? When I was a kid, I always thought of Kryptonite as a sponge, sucking the solar energy from Superman's body. However, that's not how radiation works. But in order to figure this out, we need to understand a few things. First, what's radiation? When we talk about radiation, we always think of something dangerous or the Hulk. But radiation is something that's always around us. For the definition shown here, it's the emission of energy as electromagnetic waves or moving subatomic particles, especially high energy particles that causes ionization. So basically, this is all part of a spectrum that we call the electromagnetic spectrum, and it has another word, light. And within that spectrum, there are different degrees of radiation. There are mainly two types of radiation, non-ionizing and ionizing. Non-ionizing is the type of radiation that has enough energy to excite the electrons of an atom, but not enough to rip the electrons out of its orbit around the atom. That's how you warm your sandwich in a microwave, using microwave radiation. Ionizing radiation, however, is the type of radiation that has enough energy to rip the electrons out of its orbit around the atom. As you might have guessed, that's the bad radiation, which could cause many bad side effects. See, the electromagnetic radiation has certain frequencies, and on the chart that I'm showing you right now, the frequency lowest is at the bottom and highest is at the top. At certain frequencies, the radioactive particles is able to penetrate through certain materials. The higher the frequency, the stronger its penetrating power. Oh man. For example, microwaves cannot penetrate through aluminum, but gamma rays sure as hell can. But enough science. Let's get back to Superman's weakness. Now, Kryptonite is a radioactive chunk of Krypton, basically. And the main reason why I wanted to discuss this is because a while ago in the New 52 DC Comics, there was a storyline where Superman lost his power. And I know you're thinking this has happened several times, I know. But I've actually read it and the story is pretty good. But that's besides the point. During that story, Superman somehow couldn't regain his powers, even when he was exposed to solar radiation. Several times actually. At one point he was exposed to a mini artificial sun, and eventually he came up with a theory for this. He explained that his cells mutated to the point where it can no longer absorb solar radiation, and I thought to myself, that's actually what radiation does to humans, mutation. Remember when we talked about radioactive energy penetrating through certain materials? Well, from the chart seen here, from X-rays to gamma rays, yeah, it penetrates through your skin. And remember, we talked about ionizing radiation. Yeah, well, they could break the bonds of your DNA, which of course is bad. As we all know, our DNA holds instructions for the entire makeup of our body. So changing it, or in this case breaking the bonds, can cause mutation. And the definition for mutation, as shown here, is the changing of the structure of a gene. So my theory on Kryptonite is that when Superman is exposed to that chunk of rock, his cells are temporarily mutating to the point where it can no longer absorb solar radiation. And you might be asking, so if he's exposed to Kryptonite and his cells mutate, how does he get his powers back afterwards? two words: radiation therapy. See, as we discussed before, radiation mutates your cells, and if your cells mutate too much, they'll eventually die. And if too much of your cells die off, then you'll die. That's basically how ionizing radiation works. And in radiation therapy, radiation, usually X-rays used in this case, are used on specific parts of the body where the mutated cells are located in order to destroy them. In fact, one common use for this type of therapy is to cure people who have cancer. Now back to Superman's theory. He also thought of a way to get his powers back at the time. See, since his body mostly had mutated cells at the time, he wanted to expose himself to Kryptonite in order to destroy his mutated cells and make way for healthy ones that can absorb energy. And from what we discussed, that makes perfect sense. Well, that theory could be used here as well. Imagine one day Superman is exposed to Kryptonite. Let's say 80% of his healthy cells mutated to, well, mutated cells where he can no longer absorb radiation. Only 20% is still healthy. So what does he do? He exposes himself to the sun once again and tries to get away from Kryptonite. The ultraviolet rays from the sun will further mutate his current mutated cells to the point where they're destroyed and healthy cells are formed, so he gets his powers back. Now, UV rays are only partially ionizing, so it's usually not harmful unless you're exposed to it for a long period of time, which can cause skin cancer and rashes. But remember, that's for humans. Kryptonians are obviously affected by UV rays a lot more than humans. But even after all of that, if you study in any science subject, mainly physics, you'll realize that there's a flaw in my theory. When Superman is exposed to Kryptonite, 1, the reaction happens very quickly, and 2, he's in extreme pain. His body reacts violently to Kryptonite. Mutations are not always all that bad. In fact, some mutations are quite helpful. Mutations can range from having increased metabolism to growing lots of teeth or even having an extra toe. So let's figure out what type of electromagnetic radiation this Kryptonite emits. Now, out of every human in the DC universe, there's only one who affiliates himself with Kryptonite the most: Lex Luthor. In the comics, Lex eventually got cancer from his constant exposure to Kryptonite. Now, this took years of exposure in order for this to occur, and if we relate it to the chart here, Kryptonite would most probably be X-rays, because in between it could have either been X-rays or UV rays, but you know, UV rays give Superman his powers, so it will make much more sense for it to be X-rays. Now, complete exposure to X-rays won't necessarily cause pain, and like I said before, this took years to occur. Now, this could be because of his Kryptonian biology, but I think it's something else. If I could just figure this out. Achoo! Sorry guys, this room's full of dust. I'm pretty alert. Shit. Wait a minute. Allergy. A damaging immune response by the body to a substance, especially pollen, for a particular type of food or dust to which it has become hypersensitive. So the body reacts violently in an allergic reaction. But could a radioactive material be allergic to people? Yes, actually. According to this report from the DKIPer report. Man, I'm so sorry if I'm saying the name wrong. Anyways, according to this report, at one point it says this: how does radiation cause allergies? The body digests, inhales, or absorbs radiation. For example, grain and other vegetation can absorb radiation from the soil where it is deposited by the winds from radioactive clouds. The grain, as a food source, is needed by the body, but the radiation is not. The natural reaction of the body is to reject the radiation in an effort to maintain health. Because it associates the grain with the radiation, the body rejects the grain. Continued consumption of the grain will eventually cause an allergic reaction. Now you might ask, but Megnat, aren't allergic reactions specific to certain people? Well, you're correct. Person A can be allergic to dust, and Person B could be allergic to peanut butter. However, there are also common allergies, like dust. Achoo! Oh my god, you know what, let me move out of this room, swear to god. So let's review. Kryptonite, a radioactive material from Krypton. When Superman is exposed to kryptonite, his healthy cells mutate to the point where they can no longer absorb radiation. The kryptonite also causes an allergic reaction, in which his body reacts violently to it, and the only way to stop this is if the kryptonite is taken away from him, and if he's once again exposed to ultraviolet rays from the sun in order to further mutate the mutated cells, in order to destroy them and make way for new healthy cells. And that's my theory on kryptonite. Man, how many times have I said kryptonite in this video?